Well, the good news is you're probably going to make good money either way. Getting a JD or a Juris Doctor degree, which lets you practice law, or an MBA, a Master's in Business Administration, which gives you options in the business world, what should you do? Let's talk about it. Hit that sub button. Well, there's a difference in the amount of time that it takes to get each of these degrees. A traditional JD program is 3 years, whereas a traditional MBA program is only 2. Well, that factor is pretty simple. One program is 1 year longer, one is 1 year shorter. This means obviously that if you go the route of the MBA, that is 1 fewer year that you have to pay tuition and cost of living, and it's 1 fewer year that you have to give up making income in a job, presumably that you'd be doing if you weren't in graduate school. But also keep in mind that for MBA programs, they typically require you to have at least 2 years of working experience after college before you're accepted into their programs. Whereas with JD programs, you can apply right out of college and go straight through. That means that if your goal is to get one of these degrees as quickly as possible, the JD is probably going to be faster because you can go straight through, spend 3 years after college doing it, and you're done. Whereas the MBA requires, again, at least 2 years of experience and then doing 2-year MBA program. How much do these programs cost? Well, like we just talked about, because the JD is 1 year longer, that is 1 more year of tuition and living expenses that you have to pay. So typically, the law school experience does cost more money than the MBA experience. One benchmark that you can think about here is the amount of debt that each graduate comes out with. Law students on average have around $111,000 of debt coming out of law school, whereas MBA graduates only have around $81,000. Now maybe you can argue that that's because some of the MBAs saved up money when they worked and they used that money to pay tuition and their living expenses, whereas some JDs like myself didn't go into the workforce and didn't make money after college, and therefore we went straight through and just kept spending money on tuition and living expenses. But either way, it doesn't really matter. The bottom line is law school tends to be more expensive. It's 1 year longer, and it's going to be 1 more year of tuition and living. What about getting in? How does that process look different for these programs? Well, we already talked about that. For JD programs, work experience is not necessary, though it can be looked positively on and help your application. But for MBA programs, work experience is necessary. That's one major difference. For law school, your GPA in college matters a lot more than for MBA programs. JD programs tend to prefer academic-minded people, and they really care about those hard data points like your GPA and your LSAT or your GRE score. MBA programs care about these statistics too, not the LSAT, the GMAT, but they don't care as much as law school. Now, in addition to things that these applications share, like letters of recommendation, resume, work experience, college undergraduate grades, the MBA program also requires an examination score, specifically either the GMAT or the GRE. Now, I haven't taken the GMAT or the GRE, so take this with a grain of salt, but what I've heard about those tests is that they're not as difficult as the LSAT, and if you practice enough and you work at it, you can probably score pretty well on either the GMAT or the GRE. Now, comparatively, to get into law school, you need to take either the LSAT or the GRE. Now, I have a couple of videos on the LSAT, and you can check them out here if you want advice on how to get a great LSAT score. One thing I talk about in those videos is that I believe that admissions committees prefer applicants who took the LSAT rather than the GRE, simply because historically, that is the test that admissions offices would review. The GRE is a pretty new thing that law schools are learning how to weigh, and for that reason, I recommend that you go with the LSAT. And by the way, if your goal is to get a 180 on the LSAT, then check out Adept LR. Adept LR was designed by data scientists to be the only LSAT tool that you need to crush the exam. One of my favorite parts about it is that it lets you drill questions, and if you've seen these other videos of mine on the LSAT, you know that that's the most important part of the exam. But not only that, it lets you decide the types of questions that you want to be tested on, so that you can work on your weak points and improve your score. Plus, when you're drilling questions, it will automatically change the difficulty of the questions it's asking you to better challenge you and curate your practice so you can get the best score possible. The cherry on top is that if you use Adept LR, you can take full-length sections from past LSAT exams, even more than what LSAC offers, by the way. So check out the link for Adept LR in the caption below and use code Julian for a discount. Now, what about the curriculum of these programs? You are going to school, right? So you might wonder naturally, what are you going to learn about in these courses that you're paying tens of thousands of dollars per year for? Well, without a a doubt, law school is more rigorous. Law school requires hundreds of dense legal reading every single week. To give you an example, and yes, full disclosure, I was a try-hard my first year of law school, I was reading probably 40 to 50 hours per week. And that didn't include the time that I was in lecture. Now, comparatively, MBA programs are on the lighter side when it comes to curriculum, especially when you're comparing it to the law school experience. Now, yes, in MBA programs there is reading, but it's not as intense as in law school. And from what I have heard from my friends who attended MBA programs, the courses tend to be more participatory than in law school. So whereas in law school you do a lot of reading and the professor will teach you points about the law, in business school there are more activities with group breakout sessions, and it's a little more interactive in class relative to law school. Now, this is going to be a real shocker to you, but in law school, the curriculum you're learning about is the law. It's evidence. That means that it's torts, it's contracts, it's commercial law, it's media law, it's criminal law. Law. Whereas in an MBA program, you're learning about business. You're learning about how to build a successful company. You're learning about monopolies. You're learning about economic theory. You're learning about business. For the record, the business stuff sounds a lot more interesting than the law stuff. Now, one point to touch on here while we're talking about curriculum is that there is definitely a stronger emphasis in MBA programs on the importance of networking with your classmates and with your professors and at the university relative to law schools. In law school, there is some emphasis on networking, but the focus really does tend to be on the academics. We'll talk more about this when we get to culture in a bit. Now, what about summer internships? What are you going to be doing in your summers between your program years? Well, you can check out this video where I do a detailed breakdown of the various types of roles that law students get over their summers. But the TLDR is that most of them are legal in general. Most of them involve some practice of law, whether that's working at a law firm or clerking for a judge or working as a research associate for a law professor or going into the public interest or public defender's office as a law clerk. Whereas for MBAs, obviously it's not going to be legal because they don't have that credential technically to do legal work, but instead it's going to be things in the business world like consulting, investment banking, finance, startup world, perhaps being an entrepreneur. I think in either field, the principles tend to apply that if you go to the bigger players in the private sector, you'll get paid pretty good money as a summer intern, relative to if you go into the more public-facing side of either sector, whether that's universities or public interest or nonprofits, you're probably going to get paid less. Now, student culture. What does it feel like to be in these programs? Law school, definitely nerdier. Without a doubt. Law students, they're going to be a little more technical with the way that they speak. They might be a little bit more introverted, and they're definitely going to be more academically minded. This is not to say that people in MBA programs can't be nerdy or technical or academically minded. These are generalizations, of course. But MBA programs tend to be more extroverted, a lot more social, a lot more laid back and chill, and a lot more partying. So think less of a studying until midnight at the library vibe and more of a let's go on a trip to Aspen in the winter for a week vibe. It's pretty well known that MBA classes will take all sorts of fancy vacations and trips together as a class. One of my best friends when he was at UCLA's MBA program did trips to Hawaii and Europe with dozens of his classmates. Like, don't get me wrong, me and my law school buddies, we went to Nashville one time for spring break, but there was like 9 of us, not like 90 of us. But you know, I do think that this reflects why certain people go to these programs. The MBA's focus has to do with networking and getting to know your fellow business folks so that when you all go into your careers, you're going to be able to help each other and find new opportunities. Whereas many people go into the legal profession because they enjoy the practice of reading and writing itself. One tends to be more academic and one tends to be more practical and pragmatic. Now, what about jobs? Where are you going to work if you get a JD? Where are you going to work if you got an MBA? Now, you can check out this video where I go in depth on the different job options that you have after law school. But the TLDR is that it's a lot of lawyer and law related gigs. I will note that if you're at a pretty high ranked JD program like a T14 for example, then you should keep in mind that you probably have the option if you try hard enough to do the opportunities that MBA folks have after graduation, even though you didn't get the MBA. You know, I have classmates who did investment banking and consulting and finance and entrepreneurship and startup stuff. Again, everything that MBA folks can do, who simply graduated with a JD. I don't want to overgeneralize and say that if you have a JD, you could do anything the MBA people can do, because I don't think that's necessarily true. Whether you have those opportunities definitely definitely depends on the rank of the JD program that you're at and how hard you network and try to get those positions. But it's something to keep in mind, which is why I call the JD the magical degree, because it gives you so many options. So if you graduate law school, you're probably going to end up being a lawyer. That is the most common path for people who go to law school. Duh. Whereas if you're going to an MBA program, you might go into investment banking or consulting, entrepreneurship, private equity, hedge funds, maybe academia. The overall compensation for newly graduated JDs is a bit lower than MBAs. For JDs, it's around $90,000, and for MBAs, it's around $125,000. But to be clear, in both professions, you're making decent money. And in either case, you tend to have pretty good job prospects, though this will depend on the rank and prestige of the program that you're attending. One thing you might find interesting is that it is significantly more common for MBAs to become CEOs of Fortune 500 companies than JDs. Now, some of this is common sense, yes, but the numbers are pretty staggering. Nearly 40% of Fortune 500 CEOs have MBAs, compared to only 5% who have JDs. So if your goal is to climb the corporate ladder and become a high-level executive at a major company, I think it's pretty obvious the MBA is the better path for you. Now, if we're talking about respect and prestige, both the JD and the MBA will give that to you. And some of you might be thinking, well, Julian, I've heard that there are JD MBA programs where you get to do both degrees in 4 years instead of if you were to do them separately, 3 years plus 2 years is 5 years, so you save yourself a year. What about that? Is that worth it? And look, in this video, we talked through a lot of the differences and some of the similarities between a JD and an MBA. There's no real right answer here, but I will say, to me, it feels a little bit unnecessary to get both. Because if you know that you want to practice law, then why do you need the MBA? And conversely, if you know that you want to do business, then why do you need the JD? It may sound good on paper and like a badass to say I'm a JD MBA, and it is pretty badass to be clear, but it's also a lot of money and more time that you're going to spend in school. And to my knowledge, besides the versatility that you get with the JD MBA, being able to switch back and forth from the business side to the legal side, I don't really see other major benefits by way of extra compensation or anything like that. So make the decision for you, but think about what we talked about in this video. A couple of final thoughts if you're thinking about the differences in these programs. One of these I just alluded to. Do you want to practice law? Because if you want to practice law, there's no question here, you got to get the JD to practice law. But if you don't know if you want to practice law, well, JD doesn't make as much sense, maybe the MBA is better, or neither. Is money a concern to you? We talked about how JDs tend to be a little bit more expensive than MBA programs, so maybe that's an important factor to consider. And do you like school? Do you like reading? Do you like studying? Do you like writing? If you don't like school, law school is not going to be fun for you. Frankly, MBA program may also not be that fun for you, but it'll definitely be more fun for you than law school. At the end of the day, both of these graduate programs are excellent. That's it for me today, everybody. I appreciate you tuning in. Check out Adept LR down in the caption for some great LSAT studying and use the code Julian for a discount. We got a free mentorship Discord in the caption as well. If you're not subbed, hit that sub button. I appreciate you. Take care. Have a great day.